Lanie cried aloud as the dream ended abruptly and she found herself sitting upright in her feather bed. For one moment she tried desperately to ignore the world of reality, to return to the warmth and color and joy of her dream. But she knew it was useless. Once the dream was over, there was no going back. With a quick, angry gesture, Lanie rolled out of the bed and stood on the cool pine floor, disoriented. She blinked a couple of times and finally got her bearings. "I can't believe I fell asleep," she muttered. "I still have more pies to make." Then she shrugged and turned to face the world of Lanie Bell Freeman of Fairhope, Arkansas, July 1931. Moving to a small mirror, she paused, thinking with anguish of her life as it had once been. The dream was a longing for her mother, now in her grave, and for her father, who was serving a term at Cummings Prison Farm for manslaughter. The loss of her parents was a grief so poignant that whenever Lanie Bell thought of them, a lump formed in her throat and tears burned her eyes. Lanie forced the dream from her mind, yawned, and raised her arms over her head in a broad stretch. As she threw her head back, she heard a loud ripping sound, felt the seams give way, and immediately knew what had happened. "Oh, fuzz!" she uttered with disgust. Reaching to her side, she felt the open seam and shook her head. "I'm going to have to make another dress. I'm getting fat as Jezebel." The comparison was not exactly accurate, since Jezebel was the Freemans' 400-pound sow. Lanie, at the age of 17, had emerged from adolescence into blossoming young womanhood. Her figure had swelled, and as she looked down at herself, she calculated what she could do to make a new dress. Turning quickly, she walked across the room, opened a red cedar chest, and rummaged through it until she came up with a group of flour sacks carefully washed and folded. They were white, with a delicate green flower that perfectly complemented the shade of Lanie's eyes. Quickly she counted the sacks and then nodded with satisfaction. "I've got enough here to make me a dress. I'll start on it after the celebration tomorrow." For a moment, Lanie Freeman held the material against her cheek and imagined how it would be to go into a store and buy material off a roll. She'd had this experience on a few occasions before her mother died. Since then, times had been hard, especially with the depression that had come 2 years earlier. But she never liked to spend a great deal of time in regret, so she began to think of the McCall's pattern that she had bought at the general store. She had the kind of imagination that could take the picture of a pattern, along with the color and shape and feel of the material, and envision the finished product. Suddenly, the giggle of a girl's voice came floating in from the outside window. At once, Lanie straightened up and glanced over at the clock. 11 o'clock!" she exclaimed. "Everyone's supposed to be in bed." She knew the giggle belonged to her 16-year-old sister, Maeva. Putting the flour sacks back in the chest, she went out the back door. The silvery moonlight illuminated the yard, and as she walked alongside the house, the voices became louder. Rounding the corner, she saw Maeva being kissed by a tall young man. Darrell Watkins had a bad reputation with young girls, and the anger that swelled in Lanie suddenly reached the boiling point. "Maeva, what in the world are you doing out here?" Maeva Freeman reacted exactly as Lanie expected. As she turned, the moonlight reflected on her red hair, and her blue eyes were snapping. "What does it look like I'm doing, Lanie? I'm kissing Darrell Watkins." If Maeva Freeman was ever afraid of anything, or ashamed of anything, no one ever found out about it. She had the same curves of young womanhood as her older sister, and stood there with an impudent grin on her face. "You'll have to wait if you want to get your turn with Darrell, Lanie." "How did you get out of the house?" Maeva laughed and pointed upward. "I climbed out that window, climbed down the walnut tree. If you want to keep me in, you're going to have to chop down that tree." "You ought to be ashamed of yourself." "Well, I ain't." Maeva